Hey, what's up, everybody? We have a new YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe right now. Leave a comment on the video. Share it with your friends. It's also a podcast, 3 and Out, wherever you listen with me, John Middlekauff, Apple, Spotify. We have you covered, as well as thevolume.com. We have merch. Check out. I got 3 and Out hats right now. Thevolume.com. Search the podcast. Buy some merch. Okay, let's dive into a little thing we call the mailbag. You guys know the drill. Fire into my direct messages at John Middlekauff, 2Fs, DMs, wide open, Instagram, and get your question answered here on the little thing we call the podcast. I'm a Cowboy hater. I think when they lose, America wins. However, I actually do not think McCarthy should be fired. Since McCarthy took over the play calling, Dak improved. He made Dak better. I think if your quarterback is a serial choker, you can't win. Mike did his job, and I don't think he should be punished for Dak's ineptitude. What do you think? Well, there is no arguing that Dak was really, really good throughout the season. And the reason they were the 2 seed, a huge reason, is because of the offense. And since McCarthy has been there, even when he didn't call plays, their offense has been really good. But that game, like part of being the head coach, right? Whether you're a CEO head coach like a Harbaugh or a Tomlin, whether you're a coordinator coach like D'Amico or Shanahan or McVay, you still have to prepare the entire team and have their mindset right going into a game. And clearly the Packers showed up to cause freaking havoc. I mean, the Packers showed up that game like it was their Super Bowl. And the Cowboys showed up to that game like it was, they were 3-1 and it was October 1st. So to me, the reflection, I'm with you. Dak throwing it to the other team is not necessarily McCarthy's fault. Like, of course, McCarthy doesn't want him to throw that ball. I don't think McCarthy is a bad X's and O's coach. He's proven a lot these last 3 years. He's a pretty capable, credible coach. But once you get a team like the Cowboys or like some of his Packer teams, you're going to be judged on the playoffs, right? Like once you get to a certain spot in the NBA, like James Harden could score 75 points a game. Not a soul cares anymore. What do you do in the first round of the playoffs? Do you shit the bed or do you play well? And to me, McCarthy's team came out, I think, laid one of the biggest eggs I've ever seen. We've seen teams lose, right? TCU in the national championship. What was the final score? Like 70-7? They were in a different universe, Georgia. It's like, I don't think Bill Walsh would have scored many more points. But that Packer-Cowboy game makes you question, like, can we win in the playoffs with Mike McCarthy? Is it possible? Because I had that thought. I'm with you. This gets back to Tomlin. This gets back to Pete Carroll. This gets to Mike McCarthy. Just because you go, like, question it, you go, this guy brings a lot to the table. But can I win a championship with this guy as my head coach right now from the Cowboys? Doesn't feel like you can. Same with Pete Carroll. Like, I think we need to go into it. Doesn't mean Pete Carroll's not really good. Doesn't mean Pete Carroll can't get us to the playoffs. McCarthy's won 12 games in a row. McCarthy's proven. You give him good players, he's going to win, what's that, 36 games. How many teams in the NFL would sign up for 36 wins over the last 3 seasons? 2 division championships. He hasn't failed, but he has failed in the playoffs. And he is, fair or not, when Dak throws the other team, like, he is the play caller. Tough situation. I hear you. I don't disagree that it's not just like black and white. And if Dak's your quarterback, maybe you're destined to always struggle in the playoffs, like you said. If the Eagles and Colts front offices are talking in trade Anthony Richardson for Jalen Hurts, straight up, were to be discussed, who says no? Seems to me the Colts are ready to win now, and uniting Jalen with his old OC would be enticing. Meanwhile, the Eagles get a bit concerned with the way Hurts finished the season and with Richardson's upside on a rookie deal. Would they consider blowing it up and starting over? Thanks. I think, one, financially, it would have huge cap implications for the Eagles. So I don't think it's possible to trade Jalen Hurts. Let me just, from a realistic standpoint. Now, an unrealistic hypothetical. I think the Eagles say no. Because the Eagles 2 years ago saw a guy that played at a super high level, that almost won an MVP. Anthony Richardson, for as talented as he is, hasn't proved that he could play a month without going to the blue tent and missing the season. So, yeah, he's got a lot of talent, but we have no clue if he can just play in the NFL. 5 straight years, 17 straight games. Say what you want about Jalen. He gets banged up. Like, he's pretty durable, right? He can play injured. Anthony Richardson gets hurt. He's out the game. All of a sudden, a couple injuries, out for the season. So I think the Colts would do, I think they both, Colts would do it for sure. You'd have to, right? Because Shane Steichen proved that he could win big with that guy. If you put Jalen Hurts and Shane Steichen together, I mean, the Colts probably win that playoff game week 18 and they win the division. The Eagles have to say no. Now, financially, it would be intriguing if they could get rid of the money. But I think Anthony Richardson, and listen, I like big talents. Like, I'm intrigued by that. But you couldn't risk your franchise on a guy that's proven that how many games did he play this year? 4? I heard you talking about Baker's possible salary for next year before the playoff game. Is it safe to say he earned himself $5 to $10 million annually with his performance against the Eagles? Well, Baker, and I saw one other guy, Jordan Love, right? Lower paid starters who won playoff games hit huge incentives. I think Baker's already made over $3.5 million in incentives. He was already making $4 million. So he's close to like $7-8 million. Jordan Love, who signed a 2-year, $11 million, I think had made over $7 million in incentives. So he's over 10. So if you let's just say Baker ends up making $8.5 million. You could argue he at minimum doubled that salary next year. I've been saying I can't pay him $30 or $40 million. And I'm not trying to be some hater. I'm just not paying him that. Could I pay him 3 years, $20 million a year? I definitely could talk about it and think about it. Ideally, would I like to pay him 15 to 18? Yeah. Could he get that more somewhere else? Maybe he could. The other thing is, I don't know what his market is. If you get a market, drives it up, maybe he's making $25 million a year next year. So 100% he made money, though. Do you agree that Jason Licht is a top 5 GM? Bucks homer here, but from trades, building a Super Bowl team with Brady, great cap management, underratedly young team, 9 starters on the past 2 drafts. I think he goes underappreciated as a Buck, but I get it happens when you're a small market shit division. Jason Light's good. 100%. I mean, to have obviously landing Brady and being aggressive on Brady when a lot of teams regret not making that move, you get a lot of credit for that. And then when you just look at some of the guys he's drafted, right? From Wirfs to Winfield to White, the middle linebacker, Vita Vea. I mean, they have a really, really talented team. And the Baker Mayfield situation to now win a playoff game, yeah, I mean, it's hard. We say top 5 a lot. He's clearly a really good GM. And anytime you go, we got a really good GM, that's all you want. Whether he's a second, whether he's a 6th, it changes whether you win or lose on a given week. But 100% total agreement. Jason Licht, Patriot, Eagle background. He's really good. Florida State will be the most underrated team next year, and Mike Norvell doesn't get enough credit that he deserves, in my opinion. I tend to agree, and a lot has to do with the situation got overshadowed with the quarterback injury, them being left out of the playoffs, but he did an incredible job this season. That team was really, really good. And it's sad when Jordan Travis got hurt, could they have competed in the playoffs? I think they could have. Now, he had moments this season where he didn't play as well, but obviously the moment his ankle was shattered, that their season was done, right? And it was proven when they didn't get in. But I do think that he's really good. And that's why when rumors that they were interested in him as the head coach at Alabama, I didn't think that was crazy at all. I didn't. And from a cultural fit, I think he played at Memphis. He'd worked at Memphis. He'd coached at Memphis, obviously, if you work and you're a coach. And he's now coached at Florida State. He's pretty comfortable in that region of the country, which Kalen DeBoer just simply is not. So if you would have told me they would have hired him as the next coach at Alabama, I would have applauded it. So I think you got yourself a really, really good coach. From your scouting days, can you tell us a little bit about the interview process for GM scouts? What's the process like? Super curious because I know this audience wants to hear more about your experience. Well, obviously, I've never interviewed to be a GM, so I can't speak to that. I plan this off season, once things slow down, definitely around the draft and after the draft is when GMs lighten up a lot, and to do some interviews with them. Especially Adam Peters. Like I would love to hear about his interview process. For me as a scout, and seeing the way we interviewed people in the scouting department, you usually, like, for example, when I got hired in Philly, I flew back there. I had to pay for my own flight because it was like the lowest guy on the totem pole. Typically, they pay for you to fly out. But this graduate assistant from Fresno State, no love, pay for it to go out. I had to ask my parents for money. I didn't have $500 or whatever it cost me to fly from Fresno to Philadelphia. And I think I watched 4 or 5 players. I wrote them up, and then I kind of went on a rotation meeting with people. I met with Brett Veach, I met with Louis Riddick, and I met, with the younger scouts, Mike Bradway, Brad Obie. These guys still work in the NFL, and then Howie. And they just kind of feel yourself out as a person. You talk about football with them. In my position, when I interviewed, they just kind of want to see more about, like, is this guy willing to do stuff? Is this guy have football knowledge? Is this guy ambitious? Is this guy a good cultural fit? It's not as much about, like, what are your football philosophies? Rank these 10 free agents. How much they don't care, right? Who would you have taken in the draft? Which, as you elevate, right, scouting directors and stuff like that, it changes. Well, a lot of guys, get elevated in the building, don't have to do that. Like, you've just proven your worth and you get an opportunity. And that happened to me when I got elevated the next year as a pro scout. And then the following year, Daniel Jeremiah, who was the West Coast scout, who's obviously now on television, me and him were pretty close because we're West Coast guys. I used to pick him up from the airport, and I dropped him off, and he's like, bro, I'm leaving to the NFL Network. And I was like, God, I want to go back to California so bad. Like, I want your job. So I put together a packet. I essentially started begging for the job, and I had to do a campaign. And maybe because I was cheap, I don't know, but I got it. And I haven't left the West Coast since. But I can't speak to, a GM interview. Obviously that's a fascinating question. I think a lot of that is team building experiences, failures, philosophy on coaches, philosophy on organizations, the building, the training staff, the equipment staff, it's a lot of big picture stuff that in my position, you don't even know existed. DraftKings Sportsbook, an official betting partner of the NFL playoffs, is bringing you an offer to help make the playoffs electrifying. New customers can bet $5 on any game and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook now and use code JOHN. New customers can bet $5 to get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code JOHN JOHN. The crown is yours. Got an NFL scenario for you. The Bears trade Fields for a second round. Then they trade the 9th pick, their second and their third, to New England for the 3rd pick and take Marvin Harrison Jr. and the Pats draft next, Worthy and Corley with those picks. One more, sorry. Harbaugh was to Washington. He gets to live next door to his brother, only plays in Super Bowl, and really can't draft Marvin Harrison Jr. at 2, and he can take JJ in the second round. I would never trade that much capital for Marvin Harrison Jr. I don't view Marvin Harrison Jr. as like some all-time great wide receiver prospect. I think he's really good, and he's going to go in the top 10. Remember when Atlanta, once upon a time, risked it all for Julio Jones? I wouldn't do that for Marvin Harrison. That does not mean I don't think he's good. I'd argue, I don't know if the gap between him and the next couple guys is that wide. And I think there are going to be some scouts that have Keon Coleman or, whoever, one of the LSU guys as the second best wide receiver, or right neck and neck with Marvin Harrison Jr. So I would not do that if I was the Bears. What I would do is, if I was the Bears, I would obviously trade Justin Fields, take Caleb, number 1, or whoever. I mean, listen, I don't think Caleb, I'm not just treating Caleb. I do, but I know that teams, like there are going to be some teams, like it's a conversation, right? There was no conversation with Trevor Lawrence. He was going to be the number 1 overall pick. I don't think that's the case here. If you're the Bears, like you're doing deep dives on the top 3 or 4 guys. Caleb's probably your number 1 guy, but you are doing like, are we sure? Like there was no, are we sure with Trevor Lawrence? There was no, are we sure with Andrew Luck? There isn't, are we sure with Caleb Williams? But I do think he'll end up going number 1 overall. To me at 9, you got other quarterbacks getting drafted. Let's just say 3 other guys get picked, right? Jaden Daniels, Drake May, and let's say 1 other guy. Well, you're getting one of the best players in the draft at 9. I think you 100% stay. Why does Brock Purdy get so little respect? I mean, we talked about this on the podcast earlier. It's simply because of his draft status and people don't want to be wrong. It's just that simple. Right? People are nitpicking Trevor Lawrence because they feel duped. They're like, well, I bought into the hype. I said he was the number 1 overall pick, just like every single person. And I watch him like, I don't even think he's that good. But everyone was in agreement, like, oh, Trevor Lawrence is really good. How can this happen? But Brock Purdy, most people didn't even talk about. And then he gets drafted like, this is not the way the NFL works. Guy just shows up, pick 262, and is just good and competes to win the MVP in year 2. No way. That's people in the NFL. That's people that talk about football for a living. That's fans. So I think it's just a natural skepticism where Trevor Lawrence is the example. People are talking shit about Trevor Lawrence because they feel duped. They're like, I bought into the hype. I believed. That's why people push back on Herbert. It's like, well, I see him play. I think he's good, but like, why doesn't he win more? With Brock Purdy, it's like, no, I can't. 262 be this good? No chance. Should the Rams start to look for Stafford's successor? He's getting older and takes so many crazy hits during the season. If they don't start looking, why not Justin Fields? I think Fields with McVay would be very interesting. Trade for Fields, allow him to sit for a year, maybe allow him to sit maybe for a year. He's still got insane talent. Well, here's the problem for the Rams, because I think they should be in the mix. If they like one of these quarterbacks, I haven't looked exactly what pick. Let's just pick. I'm just going to pick a number. I could be off by a couple. Let's say they're picking 22. We'll trade up from 22 to like 15. And if you really like a quarterback and he's there, take him, sit him for a year, Patrick Mahomes style, right? Because I'm with you. Matt Stafford, who is clearly unreal when he's healthy, takes more shots than anyone else in the league. I mean, there's a chance he couldn't get out of bed on Monday morning. Ribs broken, hand hurts, head's concussed. He took a beating in that game. And he is a 35-year-old that has taken a beating like guys in the 70s. So I think they're going to be in the mix to draft a quarterback. Hell, maybe in the second round. Maybe they take J.J. McCarthy and sit him for a year. But the problem with Justin Fields is, okay, I got to trade my second or third round pick, which if I'm the Rams, I've proven that I can draft players that immediately start for me with those picks. And then his contract is a problem. Like he's going into the 4th year of his contract. So then it's the 5th-year option. And yeah, that's what makes Fields pretty complicated. Finishing up this Steelers-Bills game, and I think Tomlin should stay. They need a quarterback and a real offensive coordinator. I think they're buttoned up and have a solid culture. Total agreement there. They play hard and always seem prepared. Well, let's just assume that he can get a good offensive coordinator, which is hard. I mean, he hasn't had one, it feels like, in a minute. How do they get the quarterback? How do they get the quarterback? They're drafting in the 20s. They just picked Kenny Pickett a couple years ago, who's now mad that he didn't get to start the playoff game, clearly. Like, what do you do? Trubisky's money carries over this year. They extended him, don't forget. I just don't see how they upgraded the quarterback. Maybe they could trade up and do it over again. But so you get 2 guys on rookie contracts, and then all of a sudden you have a quarterback competition with Pickett and Michael Penix or J.J. McCarthy or whoever the quarterback is you draft. It's kind of complicated. Tomlin's the least complicated. I understand if he comes back. Like, I don't think it's like crazy. I don't think he's some scrub. I think he's a good coach. I understand why Mike Tomlin wants to be the coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's the Pittsburgh freaking Steelers. But I think, how's he get an offensive coordinator who knows he's like, well, you're getting an extension. If you're not getting an extension, you're just playing out this 1 year. What if we suck? What if I get fired? They just fired an offensive coordinator. Who the hell's playing quarterback? I think that's a mess. Do they get Kirk Cousins? Do they trade for Justin Fields? I mean, there are some options out there for sure. Do you think if Mike Tomlin is fired, Mike Vrabel and Arthur Smith would take over as the head coach and offensive coordinator? I think if Mike Tomlin is traded, fired, is the coach of the Commanders or the Falcons or something, I think 100% Mike Vrabel would be the coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. When you close your eyes and you think Mike Vrabel, you think of a guy that the Rooney family would like. They drafted him in the 3rd round. I mean, he feels like a Steeler, even though when you think about Mike Vrabel, the player, you think of Patriot. But he has a lot of similarities, like would be a perfect, easy transition in that organization. The other thing, and this is what I like about having a defensive coach that is tied to an offensive coordinator. Well, if that offensive coordinator is successful, does that guy immediately get a job? Look at D'Amico. Brought Bobby Slowick with him. Bobby Slowick's been really good. Well, Bobby Slowick, is he going to get a job? Because if Bobby Slowick gets a job, well, who's D'Amico's next offensive coordinator? If I hire Belichick and he's bringing Josh, or I hire Vrabel and he's bringing Arthur Smith, who's hiring either one of those guys to be a head coach if we have success on offense the next couple of years? Josh, no chance. And Arthur Smith, I think it's going to take at least 3 years. There's a stink of Atlanta. And I mean a stinky smell. That was really smelly. That was really stinky. Like, we witnessed it. Well, I turned off a lot of games because I couldn't watch them. They were unwatchable. So to me, Arthur Smith, good number 2. Josh just cannot be a head coach. Can't do it. They run him out of town. Cowboys fan. A lot of people someone slid into my DMs the other day, and I was interacting with him on Instagram. And he's like, you can't compare the Cowboys to the Yankees or the Lakers. I'm like, I'm not comparing like recent winnings, right? I understand the Lakers won an in-season championship. I understand the Yankees have been to the playoffs, even though they didn't make the playoffs this year. The Cowboys are the biggest brand in American sports. They are. The Lakers had like 600,000 people watched them on Martin Luther King Day. The Cowboys had 40 million people watching the playoff game. So part of it is like the brand of the Cowboys, which is choking right now, is a letdown, is still the biggest brand. You put the Cowboys on TV, the most amount of people will watch sports in this country, any event, any team. I got news for you. You put Yankees, Red Sox, Sunday Night Baseball, not that many people are watching. You put Lakers, Clippers on, struggling to get 2 million people to watch. You put the Cowboys against another good team, you're talking 35 million people. Now, it usually ends in a letdown, but that's all season. They're the biggest team. And the other thing is, it'd be one thing if people talked a lot about the Cowboys and they had constantly been like a 5-win team. They were a 12-win team. They were the number 2 seed. They were hosting a playoff game. Sorry to go on that rant. Does Dak have any trade value? He doesn't deserve that top 5 quarterback money, and any picks we could use to get for him might help us package to try to jump up for one of the quarterbacks in the draft. He 100% has trade value. He definitely does. Like, you don't think the Atlanta Falcons would be interested in Dak Prescott? You don't think the Minnesota Vikings? Like, he would be an upgrade at a lot of places. Now, what type of money does he want? He's under contract for how many years? He's been under contract now? 4? He's been making $40 million a year. $40 million a year. So he's not, and he's just played some of the best seasons of his career. You think he's going to be like, okay, this time around, I'll take 27. No, he's going to want like $48 million a year. Second part, if we trade Lance, is it worth it to give Trey Lance a full season? No. Trey Lance was the starting quarterback of the Cowboys. They don't make the playoffs this year. Trey Lance can't play. Cannot play. He doesn't do anything well. He's not accurate. He can't run. He's just not very good. 49ers didn't just randomly trade him. He's just not a very good player. I'm a Panthers fan, unfortunately. You just want to know your thoughts on Bryce Young and how he played this year, especially the second half of the season. Do you think he can be a franchise guy with the right pieces around him? I loved him in the draft. I can't unsee him in just a Carolina Panthers uniform. He's the smallest player in NFL history, non-kicker. So do I believe it's going to work out? I do not. Because I don't think a guy that weighs 175 pounds at quarterback can last in the NFL. And I also think organizationally, they're kind of screwed, which some of the stuff's out of his control. Who's going to want to be the coach there? His owner is nuts. The talent on the roster is not great. They don't have their first pick. Think about this. You know, one thing we haven't talked about? What if the Panthers somehow had their first pick? What do you think we'd be saying? Because last year it was like, well, Caleb 100% would have been the first pick in the draft. Well, don't you think they would want Caleb this year? And would they just trade Bryce Young? Because I think that would be a huge conversation right now. We don't even need to waste our time because it doesn't exist. What if we rolled it back and somehow they were able to make that trade and for whatever reason not give up this year's first round pick? Wouldn't the conversation be like, well, I'd just trade Bryce Young to like the Atlanta Falcons and draft Caleb Williams? Because I think that would be a major conversation. And I do think that's what a lot of people would be saying. Do you think Harbaugh to the Chargers is really the best fit for him? They have rather meddlesome ownership. And the reason he left the Niners in the first place was because he didn't get along with Balky and Jed York. Also, Jim has proven he can turn things around no matter the situation. So I don't think he needs a good roster like Belichick does. I think it's the best situation because that's where he wants to go. All indications is he's very interested in that job. He played there. He's lived in Southern California before as a coach when he coached the University of San Diego. He coached a lot of years in California in general, San Diego, Stanford, and 49ers. He's comfortable with that. He went to high school in Palo Alto. You know, I think he's comfortable in that region of the country. When you look at the places he's coached in Michigan and California. So I think I hear you. I do think it would be uncomfortable fast for a lot of people in that organization because Jim's an uncomfortable individual. He's weird dude. So I think it would be a lot for the Spanos family to handle. But I will give them credit if they hire this. It'd be them acknowledging we don't have a choice. We need him more than he needs us. Because they do. They need Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh does not need the Chargers. Jim Harbaugh could stay at Michigan and become just like a legend. Win a couple national championships. End Ryan Day's career at Ohio State. Make a ton of money. Just continue to build on an incredible legacy. But if you're getting him, you're getting a driven guy. Because clearly he'd want to win a Super Bowl, and clearly he believes in your quarterback. So if they pull this off, I'll give the Spanos family a lot of credit. A little late, right? Should have done this years ago, hire a real coach. But they finally did it. And it's better to finally right a wrong, and they acknowledge that they had a coaching issue. Now, can they deal with them on a daily basis? It's not easy. Can you talk a little bit of how you get these head coaching offers going out and the strategy of dealing with the egos and timelines and negotiations that is this public in nature? For example, the Falcons have announced on social media that they have interviewed both Harbaugh and Belichick. Both coaches are going to have multiple offers, and undoubtedly Arthur Blank has a favorite. How do you even offer one and expect the other one to pick up your call if he feels like he's the second choice? If Blank shoots at Belichick and misses, is he doomed to have to pick up a lower profile guy? I just think it's part of the business. I think in 2024, why are the Falcons putting out that they interviewed Belichick? Right. And as most people reacted to that tweet was like, no, he interviewed you. But it's to like show the fans like we're taking this shit seriously. Right. We want Bill Belichick. It's public. These coaches, Belichick is used to publicly negotiating with players. Belichick is used to dealing with a very public situation. In a weird way, it's kind of just the way business is done. And every industry has some quirks that if you're not used to would make you uncomfortable. Belichick's 70 years old, 72 or whatever. He's been in the NFL since 1975. I think at this point in time, he's pretty numb to everything. Like, it kind of is what it is. And Arthur Blank, like, it also kind of is what it is. So you got to be willing to You're going to offer guys in free agency. You're going to offer trades in the draft. You're going to offer trades in free agency. You're going to offer coaches, whether head coach or assistant coaches, that you're going to get denied. But you got to shoot your shot. Sometimes you're going to miss. And sometimes it's more public than other times. But it just kind of comes with the territory. It's kind of the business you're in. There's no way I think he could interview Harbaugh, or you also want to control the narrative. So if you're going to interview Belichick or Harbaugh, it's going to get out. Because on their camp, they're going to want it out for leverage. So I think these teams look at it, let's control the narrative. Let's just tweet and Instagram a picture of them out and make us feel good about, that we were the ones on the forefront of that. But it's just the industry, right? It happens all the time. Like, Alabama was very careful about it, but was Kalen DeBoer their first choice? Or did they try to hire Sarkisian because that's who Nick Saban wanted, and he told him once upon a time you were going to be the coach in waiting, and Sark told him no? Well, Alabama doesn't want it out that they told him no. And Sark, out of respect for Saban, right, and Jimmy Sexton's his agent, who resurrected his career after the alcohol issues, doesn't want it out that he's mistreating that program. So some stuff is more sensitive than others, but I think in the NFL, it's just pretty cut and dry. Like, Belichick turned down the Falcons. No one, what were the Falcons supposed to do? Not offer him the job? And then you just pivot. You offer someone else the job. I think coaches are used to, getting turned down, having other guys take their spot, interviewing and not getting a job, or interviewing and taking someone else's spot. So I guess it's a long-winded way of saying, I don't think it matters much. I really don't. I think for most of us human beings, it would be a lot to handle. When I got my job in the NFL, my first job in the NFL was either 20 or 25 grand. It was so little pay that it was in the hundreds every 2 weeks. And I didn't have health insurance or whatever. When I showed up, there were 3 other people there. Now, one guy was interviewing for a bigger role, but there were other 2 guys interviewing for the role. When I got dropped off and I went to the cafeteria to eat breakfast, there were 3 other people eating breakfast. It's like, fuck. It was, I had never experienced anything like that. It kind of got my blood flowing. Like, this is pretty cutthroat business, man. So it's just a reality of the situation. I've always been curious as to why it seems like people involved in the NFL never seem to know the rules. Clock mismanagement, challenging plays that can't, defenders covering a non-eligible wideout, not being aware of the situation and taking a sack when one cannot be given. Why is this all they do and work on? Well, this is from Robin. I think the clock management thing is so much easier for us to judge on the sidelines. Like, listen, did McVay and Stafford screw that thing up the other night? Yeah, they did. But you can't hear yourself think. It's so loud in that building. You're exhausted. Stafford doesn't keep the huddle going quick enough. All of a sudden you look up and it's too late. To me, the clock management, like not calling timeouts and when to call timeouts, it's moving pretty fast when you're on the field. It's easy when we're sitting on, our couch in a pair of Nike shorts, eating popcorn and drinking a Gatorade with our feet up going, God, this guy's an idiot. I also think players that screw up, covering the wrong guy, blowing an assignment, whatever, there's a lot going on. So to be able to calm your mind when you're fatigued, what's the famous line? Like, fatigue make coward of us all. Fatigue also just makes your mind kind of implode. Think about just in general, if for 2 straight nights you sleep 3 or 4 hours, and if you're a guy that like me that needs 6-7 hours, and you sleep not very much, you're tossing and turning, whatever. By that 3rd day you're trying to work, your brain is not firing on all pistons. Well, it's no different as an athlete. When you're exhausted, you might not think straight. Even though you know the rules, you've gone over them a million times in practice. I mean, it's easy to, I would imagine if we pull the Marines, right? Boot camp and training, you can train with the best of the best. Once the game comes, even if you know what you're supposed to do in the line of fire, you might freeze, you might forget. I think that happens a lot in football. it's also a very violent game. So throughout the sport, you're not only fatigued, you're feeling pain. It's hard to keep your mind straight. It's why typically the championship level players are not only the best players, they're the most mentally strong. They practice the best. They are able to retain information. Same with coaches. What Belichick did once upon a time when that Marshawn Lynch run and Seattle was freaking out and he did not call timeout, and then they threw the interception to Malcolm Butler, and they show Seattle sideline, and it's just chaotic. I mean, people are all over the place, and Belichick's just standing over there. It's like his heart is beating like mine or yours right now, sitting on our desk chair. He's pretty rare. Like that situation's pretty rare. Or Joe Montana in 2 minutes left to go in the Super Bowl gets in the huddle and points at like Harris Barton, look at John Candy sitting right there and laughs. Like not everyone's Joe Cool in the biggest moments. Most of us, myself included, can feel overwhelmed, can freak out, right? It's something I've really worked on as I've gotten older. I'm sure many people listening to this really focus, as you work up in a company or run your own company or start your own business or, have more responsibility with children or whatever, trying to control your emotions, no matter how much you practice it, you get a phone call, something going wrong. It's easy to like lose control, right? So I think it's understandable, despite like this is what separates people at the highest level. Michael Jordan unfazed, Tom Brady unfazed, Tiger Woods unfazed. Doesn't mean they don't feel it. It means they were able to perform the best in the most pressure-packed moments. A lot of guys can't. In any business, most guys crumble, right? It's what separates the haves and the have-nots. It's what separates the top 1% from the top 5%. Like there's a gap. Like the gap of talent between Tom Brady and like Phillip Rivers or Eli Manning, is it that big? Or is there stuff that's hard to quantify? That's coaches and players. And I think there's a human element of just breaking down mentally, which I think, crosses over into all of our lives and whatever we do.